Emily Thompson felt the world around her dissolve into a blur, the chaos of the moment fading into an overwhelming silence. Time seemed to stretch and contract, a strange paradox that left her suspended between life and death. In her mind, fragmented images flickered like a broken film reel. The honking of a car, the screech of tires, and the blinding headlights that had engulfed her on that fateful night. A sudden jolt, a rush of pain, and then nothing. Now, as she lay in a dark, confined space, a creeping realization settled in her chest like an icy weight. She was not simply unconscious, she was dead. The thought sent a shockwave of panic through her. Desperately, she strained to remember the details of the accident, but all she could conjure were the echoes of sirens and the fractured faces of those she loved. Gradually, the murmur of voices began to seep through the walls of her confinement. Emily's heart raced as she recognized the familiar sound of her best friend, Jessica. "I can't believe she's gone." Jessica's voice trembled, barely holding back tears. She had so much life left to live. We were supposed to conquer the world together. Emily's chest tightened at the sound of Jessica's grief. She wanted to call out, to tell her friend that she was still here, trapped in this dark abyss. But her voice failed her, caught somewhere between the realms of existence and oblivion. Instead, she listened intently, desperate for any fragment of information that might explain her current predicament. "Emily was so driven," Jessica continued, her voice breaking. "She was always chasing the next big story. I just wish I'd told her how much she meant to me." The heartfelt confession washed over Emily like a warm tide, a bittersweet reminder of their unbreakable bond. But then, Jessica's tone shifted, darkening with an edge of bitterness. "And now look where it's gotten her. A tragic accident, just like her mother." Emily's breath hitched in her throat. She had no idea what secrets Jessica was keeping, but the mention of her mother sent a shiver of unease through her. Had the past come back to haunt her? The atmosphere shifted again as Emily heard the rustling of paper and the distinct sound of a microphone being adjusted. Her heart sank as she realized they were at her funeral. The weight of the moment crashed over her like a tidal wave, and she longed to escape from the confines of her coffin and scream at the top of her lungs. Instead, she remained still, a prisoner of her own body. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today to honor Emily Thompson." A voice boomed, cutting through the haze of mourning. It was the funeral director, a somber figure dressed in black, his voice steady yet filled with an underlying gravity. "Today we celebrate a life cut tragically short, but one that touched so many." Emily squirmed in her confinement, her mind racing. The words, "cut tragically short," echoed in her thoughts. What had really happened to her? As the director continued, Jessica stepped up to the podium, her expression a mix of sorrow and determination. Emily could see her best friend's hands tremble as she clutched the edges of the lectern, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I can't believe I'm standing here, giving a eulogy for my best friend," Jessica began, her voice shaking. Emily was more than just a journalist. She was a force of nature. She believed in the truth, no matter how hard it was to uncover. Emily closed her eyes, feeling a rush of warmth at Jessica's words. She remembered their late-night conversations, their shared dreams of making a difference in the world through journalism. But as Jessica continued, Emily sensed something amiss in her tone, something that felt like a veil over the truth. "There were things about Emily that not everyone knew," Jessica continued, her voice growing steadier but laced with an intensity that sent chills down Emily's spine. She was fierce, loyal, and uncompromising in her pursuit of justice. But she also had her secrets, just like the rest of us. Emily's heart raced. What secrets was Jessica referring to? Had she been hiding something behind that brave facade? Jessica took a deep breath, her gaze shifting to the gathered mourners. "I think Emily would want us to remember her for her courage, her passion, and her unwavering spirit. She fought for what she believed in, even when it put her in danger." Danger. The word hung in the air like a specter. Emily felt her pulse quicken as she recalled the stories she had covered, the investigations that had put her at odds with powerful people. Had her pursuit of the truth led her to this moment? Just as Jessica's eulogy reached its emotional peak, A low murmur broke out among the mourners. Emily strained to catch the words. Her curiosity piqued. "I heard they found her car abandoned by the road," one man whispered to his companion, his voice barely audible above the soft sobs. "Some say it wasn't an accident." Emily's heart dropped. What did they mean? "Do you think someone did something to her?" The other person replied, their voice laced with concern. Emily's mind raced with possibilities. Had someone targeted her? Had she unearthed something too dangerous to share? "Shh, keep it down," the first man warned, glancing around nervously. "You know how these things go. People will start talking." Emily felt the walls of her coffin close in on her as she absorbed the implications of their conversation. She had always been drawn to the truth, but now it seemed that truth was shrouded in shadows, and she was caught in the middle of a dangerous game. As Jessica wrapped up her eulogy, her voice wavering yet strong, Emily felt an urgent need to break free from her confines. She wanted to confront her friend, to demand answers about the secrets that hung heavy in the air. But how could she do that when she was presumed dead? The moment Jessica stepped away from the podium, Emily felt a surge of determination. She would not let this be her final chapter. She would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The atmosphere in the funeral home shifted as the mourners began to disperse, their faces etched with grief and confusion. Emily listened intently as they exchanged hushed whispers, their words a jumbled mix of condolences and speculation. "Do you think it was really an accident?" someone asked, their voice cutting through the somber mood. "Who knows?" another replied. Emily was always digging where she shouldn't have. Maybe she uncovered something she wasn't supposed to. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, but Emily still felt like she was working in the dark, the truth just beyond her reach. As Jessica returned to the front of the room, she looked around, her eyes scanning the crowd. Emily could see the raw emotion etched on her friend's face, but there was something else, something almost calculating. "Jessica, please," Emily thought, willing her friend to hear her. "Tell them the truth." Just then, a figure caught Emily's attention. A man stood at the back of the room, his expression unreadable. He wore a dark suit, and his eyes seemed to scan the crowd with an intensity that made Emily's skin crawl. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't quite place it. Who is that? She wondered, her heart racing as she tried to focus on the stranger. As the last of the mourners filed out, Jessica lingered, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I'll miss you, Em," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wish I could have saved you." Emily felt a pang of guilt at the thought. Did Jessica know more than she was letting on? The man in the dark suit stepped forward, approaching Jessica with a grave expression. Emily strained to hear their conversation, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm sorry for your loss," the man said, his voice low and smooth. "Emily was a remarkable woman. I know how much she meant to you." Jessica nodded, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Thank you. It doesn't feel real. Sometimes, the truth can be more powerful than we realize," the man replied cryptically, his gaze piercing through the haze of grief. Emily's blood ran cold at his words. What did he mean? Was he hinting at something darker lurking beneath the surface? As Jessica and the man continued their conversation, Emily felt a sense of urgency wash over her. She needed to know what was happening, to uncover the secrets that had led to her untimely demise. With a newfound resolve, she focused all her energy on the darkness surrounding her, willing her body to move, to break free from the bonds that held her captive. She could feel a warmth spreading through her limbs, a flicker of life igniting within her. And then, as if in response to her determination, the lid of the coffin creaked open ever so slightly. Emily's breath caught in her throat as light flooded into the darkness. She blinked against the brightness, her heart racing as she realized she was no longer in the confines of her coffin. She was free, but the world outside was a tangled web of deception and betrayal waiting to be unraveled. "Jessica!" she called out, her voice finally breaking free, echoing through the funeral home. But as she stepped out, the truth was still. Emily's heart raced as she lay confined in the darkness of the coffin, disoriented and terrified. The muffled sounds of mourning wafted through the wood, a symphony of grief that felt surreal. She could hear the tremors in Jessica's voice as she delivered the eulogy, the words punctuated by soft sobs and the occasional crack of her voice. Emily's mind scrambled to comprehend how she had gotten here, but the memories of the accident remained a jumbled haze. As the eulogy continued, she leaned closer to the splintered wood, desperate to catch a glimpse of the world outside. The faint glimmer of light peeked through the cracks, illuminating the darkness that surrounded her. For a moment, she felt a wave of panic wash over her, a primal instinct to escape. With a surge of adrenaline, she pushed against the lid of the coffin, her fingers clawing at the edges. The weight of the lid gave way, and with a creak that seemed to echo through the hall, Emily emerged into the dim light of the funeral home. Her heart thudded violently in her chest as she took in the sight before her. The mourners were gathered in clusters, their faces painted with sorrow, but their expressions shifted to shock as they caught sight of her. "Emily!" A voice rang out, and she turned to see her husband, Mark, standing frozen in disbelief, his face pale as if he had seen a ghost. The sight of him sent a jolt of betrayal through her. He had been her anchor, her partner in life, and yet, here he was, looking as though he had lost everything. "Mark, she started, but the words caught in her throat. She was still grappling with the reality that she had been declared dead. Before she could gather her thoughts, she noticed Jessica rushing toward her, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "Emily, you're alive!" Jessica exclaimed, her voice trembling as she reached out to touch Emily's arm. There was a spark of genuine relief in her eyes, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the very air around her was charged with secrets and lies. "Why did you think I was dead?" Emily demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. The mourners were beginning to murmur, their whispers creating a whirlwind of speculation. Emily's gaze darted around the room, taking in the faces of friends and family, each one a potential conspirator in the web of deceit that she was now determined to untangle. "I don't know. There was an accident, and they said," Jessica stammered, her eyes darting nervously. "They said you didn't make it. I thought I lost you." Emily's chest tightened. "You were just giving my eulogy, Jess. How could you stand there and talk about me like I was gone?" "Because we thought you were." Jessica's voice rose, a mix of frustration and fear. "I was heartbroken, Emily." As the two women exchanged heated words, Emily's gaze drifted to Mark. He stood apart, his expression inscrutable, and she felt a pang of something she couldn't quite place. Was it betrayal? Doubt? She had trusted him with everything, yet here he was, caught between relief and something darker, something that felt very wrong. Suddenly, Emily's attention was drawn to a pair of mourners whispering in the corner, their voices low but urgent. She moved closer, her heart racing as she tried to catch snippets of their conversation. "Did you see how he was looking at her?" one of them hissed. "It's sickening. They think they can get away with it," the other replied, glancing nervously around the room. Emily's stomach twisted at their words. Get away with what? She thought, her mind racing. She edged closer, straining to hear more. But before she could catch any further details, Jessica grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the conspirators. "Let's get you out of here," Jessica urged, her voice laced with anxiety. "You need to rest." "No, I need to know what's going on," Emily replied, pulling away. "Something isn't right, Jess. I need to find out what they meant." Jessica hesitated, her brow furrowing. "Please, let's just go home. You'll be safe there." "Safe?" Emily scoffed, her voice rising again. "Safe from what? My own funeral? I can't just ignore this." Mark stepped forward, his voice low and calming. "Emily, you've just come back from the dead. It's a lot to process. Maybe we should all just take a moment." Emily stared at him, searching for a hint of truth in his eyes, but all she found was a shadow of uncertainty. She could feel the tension in the air, a heavy weight that threatened to crush her. "No," she said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere until I figure this out." With a sudden burst of determination, Emily pushed past Jessica and Mark, heading toward the reception area at the back of the funeral home. The room was filled with floral arrangements, the air thick with the scent of lilies and grief. She moved through the crowd, her senses heightened as she scanned the faces around her, looking for any sign of the whispers she had overheard. As she entered the reception area, she spotted the two mourners from earlier, their hushed conversation continuing in the corner. She approached them, her heart pounding in her ears. "Excuse me," she interrupted, her voice steady. "What were you two talking about? What did you mean by getting away with it?" The two turned to her, wide-eyed with shock, and she felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Emily? But you're—" one of them stammered. "Dead?" "I was dead, yes," she snapped, cutting them off. "But I'm very much alive now, and I want to know what you meant about a conspiracy. Who were you talking about?" The other mourner exchanged a glance with her companion, and Emily could see the gears turning in their minds as they weighed their options. Finally, one of them took a step closer, lowering her voice. "You need to be careful, Emily. There are people who what?" Emily pressed, frustration boiling over. "Who want to hurt me? Who want to keep me quiet? Just tell me." Before they could respond, Jessica and Mark entered the room, their expressions a mix of concern and confusion. Mark's eyes darted between the three of them as he approached. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Emily snapped, unwilling to share her suspicions in front of him. "Just trying to figure out what happened while I was gone." She turned back to the two mourners, but they were already retreating, their faces pale and frightened. "You shouldn't be here, Emily. It's not safe," one of them whispered before disappearing into the crowd. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She had been given a second chance, but what if it came with strings attached? What if her so-called friends were part of a dark plot that threatened her very existence? "Emily, we need to talk," Mark said, his voice low and serious. "About what?" "How you comforted Jessica while I was in my coffin," she shot back, the words tumbling out before she could stop herself. Mark flinched, hurt flashing across his features. "That's not fair. I didn't know what to do. You were gone." "Gone? You were planning a life without me." Emily spat, her voice rising once again. "Emily, please," Jessica chimed in, her eyes pleading. "This isn't the time. You just woke up from something unimaginable. We need to stick together." "Stick together?" Emily laughed bitterly. "What does that even mean when I don't know who to trust?" Mark stepped closer, his voice urgent. "You can trust me, Emily. I love you. I would never want to hurt you." But as Emily studied his face, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The warmth that once enveloped her in his presence now felt like a shroud, suffocating and cold. "I need time," she said finally, taking a step back. "I need to think." With that, she turned on her heel and left the reception area, her mind racing. Outside, the world felt surreal and distorted, the sun shining brightly but casting long shadows around her. She had so many questions and so few answers, and the only way to find the truth was to dig deeper. Determined, Emily made her way to the back of the funeral home, where she spotted a narrow door leading outside. She slipped through, the fresh air hitting her like a wave, clearing her head. She needed to be alone, to gather her thoughts, to figure out what had really happened. As she stepped outside, she noticed her family gathered in a small circle, their expressions a mix of sorrow and relief. She could see her mother, her eyes puffy from crying, and her father standing stoically beside her. They hadn't seen her yet, and a pang of guilt washed over her. They thought they had lost her, and now here she was, very much alive and yet feeling more lost than ever. Steeling herself, Emily stepped forward, ready to confront her past and uncover the truth that lay hidden beneath the layers of deceit. She would not rest until she found out who had orchestrated this nightmare and why. As she approached her family, the atmosphere shifted. Emily stood in the shadows of the dark alley, the distant sounds of the funeral reception echoing in her mind like a haunting melody. She had been declared dead, yet here she was, alive and filled with a potent mix of fear and determination. The cool night air did little to calm her racing heart. She could still hear Jessica's mournful eulogy, the way her best friend had choked on her words, and the tears that streamed down her face, seemingly genuine. But now, Emily felt a nagging doubt gnawing at her gut. She took a deep breath and stepped out into the faint light spilling from the street lamps. The alley was narrow and littered with debris, the walls lined with peeling paint and graffiti that told stories of a city that had seen better days. Emily's mind raced as she thought about the whispered conversation she had overheard. Betrayal lurked in the shadows, and she needed answers. "Jessica," Emily called, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and urgency as she spotted her best friend a few paces away, leaning against the brick wall, her face pale under the dim light. Jessica turned, startled, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Emily? Is that you?" Jessica's voice was barely a whisper, as if she feared saying her name would shatter the fragile reality in which she found herself. "It's me. I need to talk to you now," Emily urged, stepping closer. The look on Jessica's face was a mixture of shock and confusion, and Emily could see the inner turmoil battling within her best friend. How are you even here?" Jessica stammered, glancing around as if expecting someone to jump out and claim this moment was a cruel joke. Emily's frustration bubbled over. "I heard what you said at the funeral. I heard the whispers. I know something is wrong, Jessica. What did you mean when you said Mark was acting strangely? What is going on?" Jessica's expression shifted from disbelief to fear. She was caught off guard. "Emily, this isn't the time. You should be, what? Dead? You think I want to be here right now? I need to know the truth. Did you know something about the accident?" Emily pressed, her voice rising with urgency. Jessica looked away, her gaze fixating on the ground. I didn't know it would happen like this. Mark was just different. He was distant, secretive. I thought it was just stress from work or something, but now—" Her voice trailed off, and Emily could see the guilt etched on her friend's face. "Now it looks like he might have orchestrated my death?" Emily shot back, her heart pounding as she felt the weight of betrayal settle heavily on her shoulders. "What else do you know, Jessica? I need you to be honest with me." Jessica ran a trembling hand through her hair, her eyes darting around as if she expected someone to overhear them. "I shouldn't be telling you this. If Mark finds out, then tell me to my face, Jessica. I deserve to know if my life is in danger," Emily insisted, taking a step closer. "You owe me that much." Okay, Jessica relented, her voice barely above a whisper. "Before the accident, Mark had been meeting with someone. I thought it was just work-related, but it was strange. He would come home late, smelling like cheap perfume, and he wouldn't let me see his phone. I thought he was having an affair, but now—" She paused, swallowing hard. "Now I don't know what to think." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Who was he meeting with? Do you have any idea? Jessica hesitated for a moment, her brow furrowing in thought. "There was a woman, Claire. I think her name was. I saw them together once at that coffee shop near your office. They looked close, but I didn't think much of it at the time." The name felt like a punch to Emily's gut, igniting a flicker of recognition. She had seen Claire around, often at social functions, always charming and disarmingly beautiful. That was the last thing Emily needed to hear right now. "Did you ever confront him about her?" Emily asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "No," Jessica admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "I was afraid. I didn't want to push him away even more. I thought if I gave him space, he'd come back to me. I was trying to be supportive, but now I see I was just being naive." "Naive?" Emily echoed, feeling a wave of frustration wash over her. "You let him keep secrets from you, Jess, and now I'm dead because of it." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. If I had known." "If you had known what? That he might have killed me? That he was involved in something dangerous?" Emily interrupted, her voice sharp with accusation. "You need to tell me everything you know, Jessica. I can't go back to being a ghost. Not now that I know I have to fight for my life." As Emily's words hung in the air, she caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of her eye. A shadowy figure stood at the far end of the alley, watching them intently. The figure was cloaked in darkness, and for a moment, Emily felt a rush of panic flood her senses. She turned back to Jessica, her voice low and urgent. "We're not alone. Someone's watching us." Jessica's eyes widened in fear, and she instinctively took a step closer to Emily. "Who is it? Do you think it's Mark?" "I don't know," But we need to get out of here, Emily replied, her heart racing. She scanned the alley, looking for a way to retreat without drawing attention to themselves. We can't stick around. If they're involved in whatever happened to me, confronting them here is the last thing we should do. Right? Jessica agreed, her voice shaky. They turned to leave the alley, but just as they did, a voice called out from the shadows. Emily? Is that really you? The voice was deep and smooth, cutting through the tension like a knife. Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Who's there? She called out, trying to keep her voice steady. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a man in a dark coat, his face partially obscured by the brim of a hat. You shouldn't be here. It's not safe. Who are you? Emily demanded, her instincts kicking in. What do you want? Just to talk, he replied, his tone casual, but there was an undercurrent of urgency that sent shivers down Emily's spine. I know what happened to you, and I can help. Help? Help how? Emily replied, skepticism lacing her voice. She felt Jessica's hand grip her arm tightly, fear radiating between them. I know things about Mark and Claire that you don't, the man said, taking a cautious step forward. Things that could change everything. But we need to get somewhere safer to talk. Stay back, Jessica shouted, stepping in front of Emily protectively. Jessica, wait, Emily said, holding her friend's arm. If he knows something, we need to listen. We need any lead we can get right now. The man raised his hands in a gesture of peace. I promise, I'm not here to hurt you. My name is Sam. I was a detective before all of this. He gestured vaguely, and Emily sensed a deep well of regret behind his words. I've been following the trail of corruption surrounding your accident. There's a lot more going on than you realize. Emily exchanged a glance with Jessica, who looked torn between fear and curiosity. How do we know we can trust you? Jessica asked, her voice trembling slightly. You don't, but time is running out. Mark is involved in something dangerous, and if you stay here, you could become a target, Sam replied, his expression serious. We need to move. Emily felt a torrent of emotion swirl within her. She was standing at the precipice of a conspiracy that threatened her very existence. Okay, she said finally, her voice steady. We'll listen. But if this is a trap, it's not, Sam interrupted, his eyes locking onto hers with a fierce intensity. I just want to help you find the truth. With a reluctant nod from Jessica, Emily took a step closer to Sam, her heart pounding in her chest. They were about to dive headfirst into a world of darkness and deception, but Emily felt a surge of determination. She would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Together, they would confront the shadows lurking in her past and fight for her future. Emily stood in the shadows outside the upscale bar, her heart racing as she clutched the damp fabric of her dress, still a stark reminder of the funeral she had just escaped from. The glow of the neon sign flickered above her, casting an eerie light on the brick wall beside her. She had followed Mark here, driven by a need for answers. Answers that felt increasingly elusive. The muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses wafted through the door, reminding her of the life she once had. Peering through the window, Emily's breath hitched at the sight before her. Mark sat at the bar, his posture relaxed, a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling inside her. He was leaning slightly towards a woman seated beside him, and Emily's gut twisted at the familiarity of the scene. This woman, with her sleek hair and confident demeanor, was someone Emily had never met before. She exuded an air of mystery that was unsettling, and Emily felt an intense urge to know who she was and what her connection to Mark was. God, I can't believe she's really gone, the woman said, her voice smooth yet tinged with something that sounded almost rehearsed. Mark nodded, his expression a mixture of grief and something else, something Emily couldn't quite place. I still can't wrap my head around it. 1 minute she was here, and the next. His voice trailed off, his eyes shadowed by a hint of guilt. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She felt as if she were intruding on a private moment, yet she couldn't pull herself away. The need to understand was far too strong. She shifted her weight, trying to catch more of their conversation without being seen. It's strange, isn't it? How quickly everything changes. Claire. Emily had just decided to name her in her mind. Leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You should have known, Mark. She was always too ambitious for her own good. Emily's heart raced as anger bubbled up within her. Ambitious? Was that what they were calling it now? What did this woman know about her? Yeah, well, it's too late now, Mark replied, his tone bitter. We have to figure out how to move on without her. It's what she would have wanted, right? Emily's insides twisted at the thought. She had dedicated her life to her career. Sure, but she had never wanted to leave anyone behind. She had loved Mark fiercely, believed in their future together. The betrayal she felt was palpable, and she fought against the tears threatening to spill. Claire's voice snapped her back to the conversation. You know, the insurance money will help. It's a clean slate, Mark. We could really use it. Just think about it. No more shadows of the past. Just you and me. The mention of insurance money sent a chill down Emily's spine. Was that why Mark had been acting so strange? Had he orchestrated her accident for profit? The thought was almost too much to bear, and she felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Yeah, I get that, Mark replied, his voice low, almost conspiratorial, but we need to be careful. If anyone finds out, before he could finish, Emily's foot slipped on the uneven pavement, sending her stumbling forward. In a panic, she reached for something to steady herself and accidentally knocked over a drink from a nearby table. The glass shattered on the floor, the sound echoing sharply in the open space. Time seemed to slow as Mark turned to look in her direction, his eyes widening in horror. Emily, he gasped, eyes darting with panic. Caught in a moment of sheer terror, Emily froze. Her heart pounded in her chest as she felt the weight of his gaze on her. She had been so careful, so determined to remain invisible, and yet here she was, exposed in the very place she had tried to avoid. Mark, what is she doing here? Claire's voice cut through the tension, sharp and accusatory. Emily, Mark started, but the shock in his eyes was replaced by something else, something darker that sent a chill down Emily's spine. She didn't wait for him to finish. Adrenaline kicked in, propelling her to turn and run. She dashed through the bar's entrance, her heart racing, the need to escape overpowering every rational thought. Emily, wait, Mark called after her, but she didn't look back. She burst out into the cool night air, the sounds of the bar fading behind her, replaced by the quiet rustle of leaves in the wind. The streets were dimly lit, and as she ran, the adrenaline coursed through her veins, pushing her forward. She didn't stop until she was several blocks away, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She leaned against a brick wall, pressing her palms to her knees, trying to calm the storm within her. What had just happened? The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place, but they painted a picture that was too horrific to grasp. She had to confront Mark. She had to understand why he had betrayed her, why he had allowed her to be declared dead. As she caught her breath, she replayed the conversation in her mind. The insurance money, Claire's insistence on moving on, and Mark's strange willingness to entertain such a notion. It all pointed to a dark conspiracy, one that was slowly unraveling before her eyes. Think, Emily, think, she muttered to herself, running a hand through her hair in frustration. She needed a plan. She had to gather evidence, something concrete to show that her life had been worth more than a mere payout. Suddenly, a thought struck her. Jessica. If anyone could help her piece this together, it was her best friend. But could she really trust Jessica? The anguish of betrayal gnawed at her, but she knew she had to try. With newfound determination, Emily straightened up and took a deep breath. She would confront Jessica, but she had to be smart about it. If there was a chance that Jessica was involved, she couldn't let her guard down. Emily made her way to Jessica's apartment, her mind racing with the possibilities of what she might find. She had seen the way Jessica and Mark had interacted at the funeral, the way they had leaned into each other, sharing quiet moments of grief. Had her best friend been part of this all along? As she approached the building, her heart pounded in anticipation. She knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the silence. A few moments later, Jessica opened the door, her eyes widening in shock. Emily, is that really you? Jessica's voice was a mixture of disbelief and concern. Emily didn't waste a moment. We need to talk, Jess. It's about Mark, about everything. Jessica's expression shifted, a flicker of apprehension crossing her face. I don't understand. Are you okay? I'm fine, Emily snapped, her frustration spilling over. But I need you to tell me the truth. What do you know about Mark and Claire? Jessica hesitated, her brow furrowing. What are you talking about? I don't understand. Cut the act, Jessica. Emily's voice rose, her emotions spilling out. I saw them together at the bar. I heard them talking about insurance money. Was it all a lie? Were you in on this? Jessica's face paled, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. Emily, I swear, I didn't know. I thought what? Emily interrupted, anger and hurt twisting inside her. That Mark would just magically get over my death and be there for you? I trusted you. Please, just let me explain. Jessica's voice trembled, and Emily saw the glimmer of tears in her eyes. I thought he was grieving. I thought he needed someone. I didn't think. You didn't think? Emily echoed, disbelief flooding her. You didn't think about how I would feel? How could you do this to me? But I didn't know, Emily. I promise. It was just comfort. Jessica's voice cracked, and Emily felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by the betrayal she felt. Comfort? And what was I to you then? Just a footnote in your life? Someone you could toss away when it became inconvenient? Emily, please. Jessica's voice was desperate now. I'm your friend. I would never wish you harm. You have to believe me. Emily took a step back, her heart breaking at the sight of her friend's anguish. I don't know what to believe anymore, Jess. I have to find the truth. I need to know what's really going on. With that, Emily turned and walked away, leaving Jessica standing in the doorway, a broken expression on her face. The streets felt colder now, the weight of betrayal heavy on her shoulders. She had lost her husband and her best friend in one fell swoop, and the path ahead was shrouded in darkness. As she walked, Emily's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of her life that felt like they had been ripped apart. There had to be more to this story, more than just the betrayal of those she had trusted. She would find the truth, no matter the cost, and she would make sure that those responsible for her pain would answer for their actions. Determined, she set her sights on uncovering the web of deceit that surrounded her. Preparing, Emily stumbled out of the bar, her heart racing as the cool night air hit her face like a slap. The streetlights flickered ominously, casting long shadows that danced in the darkness. She could still hear the echo of Mark's horrified gasp when she knocked over the drink, the sound reverberating in her mind like a haunting melody. She felt exposed and vulnerable, as if every passerby could see the truth written across her face. Where do I go now? She muttered to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. The streets felt foreign and intimidating, each corner holding the potential for new dangers. She needed to gather her thoughts, to piece together the shattered fragments of her life that had been turned upside down in a matter of days. Fighting back the rising tide of panic, Emily turned down a narrow alley, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just overheard. Mark, her husband, was tangled up in something dark and dangerous, and Jessica, her best friend, her confidant, seemed to be part of this web of deceit. How could they? She thought, the betrayal cutting deeper than any physical wound. As she wandered deeper into the alley, she spotted an abandoned building looming ahead. The windows were boarded up, and the door hung ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. It was a perfect place to hide, to think, to regain her composure. Stepping inside, she was greeted by the musty smell of decay and neglect. Dust motes danced in the faint moonlight that filtered through the cracks, illuminating the remnants of what once might have been a vibrant space. Emily moved cautiously, her senses heightened. Each step echoed ominously in the hollow space. She pressed her back against a cold, crumbling wall and slid down to the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees, trying to quell the storm of emotions swirling within her. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of sirens wailing somewhere in the night. Think, Emily, think, she urged herself. She closed her eyes, trying to focus, to remember the pieces of her life before everything spiraled out of control. Mark had always been her rock, her anchor. How could he have betrayed her so completely? And what about Jessica? The realization that her two closest allies could be involved in her downfall felt like a physical blow. Just as she began to feel the weight of despair creeping in, the sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Emily's heart raced again, and she instinctively pressed herself further against the wall, hoping to remain unseen. The footsteps grew closer, and a figure emerged from the shadows. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weary but determined look in his eyes. "Hello?" he called cautiously, scanning the dimly lit space. "Is anyone there?" Emily held her breath, unsure whether to reveal herself or remain hidden. Her instincts told her to stay quiet, but something about the man's voice felt strangely reassuring. "I'm not here to harm you," he said, his tone low and steady. "I just want to help." Reluctantly, Emily stepped out from her hiding place, her hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace. "Who are you?" she asked, suspicion lacing her voice. The man took a step closer, his expression softening. "My name is Sam. I used to be a detective, and I've been looking for you." "Looking for me? Why?" she questioned, her mind racing. "What do you know about what happened?" Sam nodded, as if he understood the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. "I know more than you think. I've been following the case since the accident and your death. Well, it doesn't sit right with me. I believe there's more to it." Emily narrowed her eyes, trying to gauge his sincerity. "What do you mean? You think it was planned?" "I do," he replied, his voice low. "I've seen the signs. There are people close to you who have motives, and I suspect they're involved in something much bigger than just a tragic accident." "How do you know all of this?" she asked, crossing her arms defensively. Sam hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I have contacts, people who've shared information with me. I wasn't on the case officially, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a simple accident. The way things unfolded, it felt orchestrated." Emily felt a mix of hope and skepticism. "And what do you want from me?" "I want to help you find the truth," he said earnestly, "to uncover what really happened to you. If we work together, we might be able to expose those responsible." She studied him, searching for any hint of deception. There was something in his eyes that suggested he was genuine, a weariness that spoke of a long fight for justice. "And how do I know you're not just another person trying to manipulate me?" Sam sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You don't, but I can promise you this. I have nothing to gain from this. I just want to see the truth come to light, and I believe you deserve that." Emily's defenses began to lower slightly. The thought of having someone on her side, someone who understood the complexities of her situation, was tempting. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's say I believe you. What do we do next?" "First, we need to gather evidence," Sam replied, his voice gaining momentum. "I have some leads that could be useful. We need to dig into your husband's dealings, and we might have to confront some people who are involved." "Mark and Jessica," Emily whispered, the names like a bitter taste on her tongue. "I can't believe they could do this to me." "They're not the only ones," Sam warned. "There are layers to this, and as we peel them back, we might uncover more than just betrayal. There could be financial motives, connections that go beyond what you could imagine." Emily felt her heart pound in her chest as she considered the implications of his words. What if they find out I'm alive? What if they come after me? "Then we need to be smart about this," Sam said, his expression serious. "We'll need to be cautious and strategic. If they think you're dead, it could give us an advantage for now." "What about evidence?" she pressed. "How do we find proof of their wrongdoing?" "I have some contacts who can help us dig into financial records and other questionable activities," he explained. "But you need to stay safe and hidden for the time being. We'll work together, and I promise we'll find what we need." Emily nodded slowly, a sense of determination washing over her. She had spent too long feeling like a victim, too long letting the betrayal fester in her heart. It was time to take control of her own narrative. "Okay, let's do this," she said, her voice steady. Sam smiled faintly, a glimmer of hope igniting in the darkness of the abandoned building. "Good. We'll start by gathering what we can tonight." Let's move quickly. As they stepped out of the dilapidated structure into the cool night, Emily felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. The streets were still filled with shadows, but for the first time since awakening at her own funeral, she felt a flicker of hope, a chance to reclaim her life and uncover the truth behind the web of lies that had ensnared her. Together with Sam, she would face the darkness head-on, determined to bring light to the treachery that lurked in the hearts of those she once trusted. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the secluded clearing where Emily had arranged the confrontation. She stood on the edge, her heart pounding in her chest as she awaited the arrival of Mark and Jessica. The whisper of the wind through the trees seemed to echo her anxiety, and she could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on her shoulders. She had spent too long in a fog of confusion, piecing together the fragments of her betrayal, and now it was time to expose the reality that had been hidden from her. As the headlights of Mark's car cut through the darkness, Emily's stomach twisted in knots. She had seen the way he had looked at Jessica during the funeral, the way he had held her hand, as if their bond was unbreakable. But Emily knew better now. She had uncovered the threads of deceit woven into the fabric of her life. This was her moment. Mark stepped out of the car first, his demeanor casual but his eyes darting around, as if sensing an impending storm. Jessica followed closely behind, her expression a mix of concern and determination. Emily could see the flicker of recognition in their eyes as they caught sight of her, standing defiant at the center of the clearing. "Emily?" Mark's voice was laced with disbelief. "You're alive?" "Surprise," Emily replied, her voice steady despite the tempest of emotions swirling within her. "I took a little detour from the great beyond." "What the hell is going on?" Jessica interjected, glancing nervously between Mark and Emily. "You shouldn't be here. You need to go home." "Home?" Emily scoffed. "You mean the place where I was supposed to be dead? You both thought you could get away with it. But I know the truth now. You both planned it, didn't you?" "Emily, you're not making any sense," Mark said, his tone shifting from shock to irritation. "You were in an accident." "An accident?" Emily interrupted, her voice rising. "That's what you want everyone to believe, isn't it? But it was all a part of your scheme. You wanted me out of the way so you could be with Jessica and cash in on my life insurance policy." Jessica's face paled, and she took a step back. "That's insane. You're being paranoid." "Am I?" Emily shot back, her eyes narrowing. "I overheard you and Mark in the funeral home. You were discussing how you could finally be together. It was all a lie, wasn't it?" Mark's expression hardened, and he stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "You need to stop this nonsense, Emily. You're not thinking straight. You're still traumatized from the accident." Emily felt a surge of anger, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I know what I saw. I know what you both did, and you're not going to convince me otherwise." "Enough," Mark barked, his patience wearing thin. "You have no proof. Nothing but your wild accusations." At that moment, Emily heard the rustle of leaves behind her. Sam emerged from the shadows, his presence a silent reassurance. "Actually, I do have proof," he said, his voice steady and commanding. "The police are on their way, Mark. They've been tipped off about your little scheme." Mark's expression shifted from anger to panic. "You think you can just come here and ruin everything? You don't know who you're dealing with." Emily felt a surge of triumph as she watched the realization dawn on Mark. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A coward who thought he could escape the consequences of his actions." "Coward?" Mark spat, taking a menacing step forward. "You think you're in control here? You're just a ghost haunting me. You were dead, Emily." "Not anymore," she replied, her voice unwavering. "And I'm here to reclaim my life." As the tension thickened, Jessica's eyes darted back and forth, her expression shifting from fear to desperation. "Mark, we can't let this happen. We have to do something." Mark's gaze flicked to her, and for a moment, Emily saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "What do you mean, we?" he asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. "You're the one who wanted this, Jess. You were the one who—" "Stop it," Jessica shouted, cutting him off. "I didn't know it would go this far. I thought we could figure something out. I thought it would be easy." Emily watched as the cracks in their facade began to show, the weight of their betrayal finally breaking through the surface. "Easy for you, perhaps," she said, "but not for me. You threw my life away for a chance at something you thought was better." Mark clenched his fists, his anger boiling over. "You don't know the first thing about what I've been through. You think this was easy for me? You were a burden, Emily. A weight around my neck? Then why didn't you just leave?" Emily challenged, her resolve strengthening. Why resort to murder? At that moment, the sound of sirens pierced through the night air, growing louder as they approached. Mark's face twisted in panic, and he turned to Jessica, his voice rising in desperation. "We have to get out of here." "What about Emily?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling. "We can't just leave her." "Are you kidding me?" Mark shouted, his eyes wild. "She's the reason we're in this mess." Emily took a step back, feeling the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She could see the cracks in their alliance widen, the betrayal that had once seemed so solid now crumbling before her eyes. "You're both going to pay for this," she said, her voice filled with determination. "You thought you could silence me, but I'm not going anywhere." As the police lights illuminated the clearing, Sam stepped forward, his expression firm. "You're under arrest, Mark. And you too, Jessica. We have enough evidence to charge you both with conspiracy and attempted murder." Mark's face went pale as the realization of his impending doom sank in. "You can't do this," he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. "I already did," Sam replied, his tone unwavering. "And it's time for you to face the consequences." As the officers stepped out of their vehicles, Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. The truth was finally out, and the weight of her betrayal was lifted. Sam's presence had turned the tide, and now Mark and Jessica would have to answer for their actions. "Emily," Mark said, his voice trembling as the officers approached him, "you don't understand. I did it for us. For our future." "Our future?" she echoed, her voice cold. "You never cared about our future. You only cared about yourself." As the officers placed Mark in handcuffs, Emily felt a strange sense of closure. The man she had loved and trusted was nothing more than a stranger now, a specter of the past that she was finally ready to leave behind. Jessica stood frozen, her expression a mixture of disbelief and regret. "Emily, please," Jessica pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "I never wanted it to end like this. I thought I could help him. I didn't know it would go this far." "You helped him betray me," Emily said, her voice steady. "You chose to turn your back on our friendship for your own desires. You'll have to live with that." "Maybe you're right," Jessica whispered, her voice cracking, "but I didn't think it would come to this. I thought we could find a way out." "There was no way out," Emily replied, her tone resolute. "You both made your choices, and now you'll face the consequences." As Mark was led away by the officers, Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world slowly lift from her shoulders. She had reclaimed her life, and while the scars of betrayal would remain, she knew she was finally free. In the aftermath, as the police began to gather evidence and take statements, Emily felt a sense of calm wash over her. She had faced the storm and emerged stronger, ready to embrace the future that awaited her. As she stepped away from the chaos, she felt a familiar weight in her pocket. She reached in and pulled out the letter from her late grandmother, the one she had almost forgotten in the whirlwind of revelations. With trembling hands, she unfolded the aged paper, the words inked in her grandmother's elegant script. "My dearest Emily," it began, "life will throw trials your way, but it is in those moments that you will discover your true strength. Remember, you are never alone. You carry the legacy of our family within you, and that legacy is one of resilience and courage. Embrace your journey, and do not be afraid to forge your own path." As Emily read the words, tears filled her eyes. She realized that her grandmother's wisdom was more than just a reminder of her heritage. It was a call to action. She had the power to redefine her life, to rise from the ashes of betrayal and build something beautiful in its place. She would no longer be a victim. She would be a survivor. With renewed determination, Emily straightened her shoulders and walked forward, ready to reclaim her narrative. The shadows of her past would no longer define her. She was ready to step into the light and embrace the future she had always dreamed of. The world was waiting, and she was ready to meet it head-on.